David Hume was an 18th century empirical philosopher who died the year the Declaration of Independence was signed. Given that that was over 200 years ago, we might ask why we care about anything that David Hume wrote or proposed. The reason is that he is still very influential today. In fact, he was one of the guiding inspirations behind the development of the analytical movement during the 20th century that was quite the rage in many philosophy departments of universities throughout the English-speaking world. In fact, one can say that David Hume did make some very positive contributions in the development of philosophy, but where some of his major intentions were originally directed, here he did not do so well. And it is important to take a look at this and to understand why. In his Treatise of Human Nature, which was published in 3 volumes during the years shown, David Hume says that he sets out for himself the development of what he calls a science of man. This science of man, he tells us, is necessary because it is going to be the basis on which all other organized bodies of knowledge are going to be set. If we don't understand the fundamental groundwork of the human condition that develops all of these ideas, then all the conceptual schemes that we construct are going to be sort of like house of cards built on foundations of sand. So this is what he sets about to do in his work, The Treatise. Very early on in the work, he sets himself out to describe the contents of the mind. And he does this by noting that what the mind contains are perceptions. Perceptions, he tells us, are, so to speak, of 2 types. The first of these he calls an impression, and defines this as some kind of sensory datum immediately impacting on a sensory receptor. So, for instance, the color of the thing as seen by the eye, or the odor of a thing as smelled by the nose, that kind of thing. Following on impressions, there is the idea. Hume defines this idea as a faded, imprecise, or vague memory or image of a past impression. He further tells us that all ideas, now notice this is without exception, all ideas, especially abstract ones, and we'll take a look at how he defines those, but all ideas, especially abstract ones, are naturally faint and obscure, and the mind has but a slender hold of them. They are apt to be confounded or confused with other resembling ideas. Now, if we think about this, what would a science of man, or any science for that matter, primarily be composed of? Ideas, right? Concepts, notions. Now, if all these ideas are faint, obscure, easily confounded, and so on, what kind of a science are we going to have? Science is supposed to tell us something that is certain, or at least highly probable. Are we going to be able to get that from ideas as they are described or defined by David Hume? Whatever the case, to recap, for Hume, the mind has perceptions, possesses these perceptions, and these are divided off into impressions and ideas. Now, this is quite different from the notion of idea as found among the classical Greek thinkers, the classic ancient thinkers, as well as many of the medieval thinkers. For them, an idea is a universal, or something universal in form. Ideas are archetypes. They discern the characteristics or aspects or properties or relationships that ideally apply to all instances of that sort. They're not things that end up being easily confounded or confused with one another. In fact, what they are supposed to do is to bring about a clarity in terms of how we organize or categorize the objects of our knowledge. They are supposed to determine, as much as possible, the essence or nature of the objects, or as they called it back then, its formal cause. They're trying to determine what the internal dynamism is in any object that makes it to be the kind of thing it is, and that makes it accordingly different from other objects which have other essences or natures. But the way Hume defines ideas, especially abstract or general ones, seems to make the achievement of this goal impossible. This is how he describes the formation of such ideas. They are a mental collection of similar perceptions or ideas to which a word is appended. So man, as a general idea, consists of a number of imagined residues or immediately experienced objects, different heights, different weights, different sizes, different structures, but not a concept which penetrates into the nature that that object possesses or participates in. So again, what kind of a science are we going to have if it's constructed of general ideas of this type? The problem with Hume's analysis, we find, does not stop there. While he maintains that the human mind contains two kinds of perceptions, he also holds that it possesses two types of truths. So, let's look at the two kinds of truths or types of truths according to Hume. The first type of truth he calls matters of fact. Matters of fact are statements made about events or conditions in the world, or oneself as well. I can say something like, I'm hungry or I'm thirsty or whatever. But whatever is the case, it's based on perceptual evidence or on reliable testimony. But such information or data is inherently non-necessary. The event described could have occurred differently, and even if it happens repeatedly in the past, it makes no claim on it happening that way in the future. So, for instance, the fact that the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776 is a truth of fact, or a matter of fact, but it could have been signed earlier if the Continental Congress had gathered prior to when it did, or later if they had had some difficulties in getting together in order to sign it. The other type of truth he calls a relation of reason. These are truths in which the subject or predicate of a proposition are intuitively understood as necessary. That is, they belong to, or not, one another, no ifs, ands, or buts. So, for instance, the statement, all bachelors are unmarried men, would be a case of a predicate belonging to a subject. The predicate is unmarried men. The subject is bachelors. Or the example, no square is a circle. The predicate circle does not have anything or can have anything to do inherently with that which is a square. These are, so to speak, forms empty of any actual content, as Kant might say, acquired from the world. So, for instance, knowing that all bachelors are unmarried men does not tell me how many bachelors there are, where they can be found, or who is not a bachelor. That would be a statement of fact. Relations, or truths of reason, are known a priori. It's an a priori manner by which we come to know them. That is, they are above or beyond any given experience or set of experiences. For instance, take the statement, the whole is always greater than any of its parts. I don't have to go out and take a look at a whole bunch of different wholes and parts relationships to know the truth of that statement. All I need to do is to put the two parts of the proposition together if it necessarily fits, or set them off from each other if they necessarily do not. That is unlike matters or truths of fact which are known a posteriori, that is, concurrent with or after experience. So, according to Hume, we have these two types of truths, matters of fact and relations of reason. But he goes further. He says that all propositions convey either a matter of fact or a relation of reason. All propositions do that. So there are no other kinds of propositions except those that convey a fact or that convey a relation of reason. However, here's a problem. What kind of a proposition is this? That is, the proposition that all propositions are either matters of fact or relations of reason. Is that proposition itself a matter of fact or a relation of reason? See, what we're doing now is we're applying the principle to that proposition itself and seeing what we come out with. Now, if we say that it's factual, then we also have to maintain that it is non-necessary. That's the definition that Hume has given us. If it is non-necessary, then it means that there could be other kinds of propositions besides these two. In fact, that's exactly what Kant is going to hold a generation later when he says that in order to have science, or in order to have a valuable philosophy of any sort, we have to have propositions that necessarily state something about reality. And that is a possibility that that Hume's philosophy does not allow for. Okay, so we have to say, if it's factual, if you're going to say it's factual, you've got a problem. How about saying that it is of reason, that it's a relation of reason? Well, if it's that, then it tells us nothing about real propositions in the world. Remember, a relation of reason is an empty form. It doesn't contain anything within it. It simply sets up a necessary affirmation or negation of the subject with the predicate. What kind of propositions would be needed to form a science of man? Well, some at least would have to convey necessary truths about actually existing human beings. The problem where Hume is concerned is that there is no place in his epistemology for these kinds of truth-bearing claims. So it appears as if Hume, right from the get-go, has structured a philosophy, an epistemology, that is going to prevent him from doing what he actually intends at the very beginning of his work, a treatise on human nature. Of course, Hume is not the only one to fall victim to his own definitions. His predecessor, René Descartes, certainly had a problem with that in the way that he defined body on the one hand and mind on the other. He did it in such a way that it became very difficult to explain how the two of these interact in the way that we experience them as interacting. For Hume, he made it difficult to ever develop a science of man, given how he defined ideas and truths. For this, he had to go back to the drawing board. Thanks for watching this. If you have any comments, I would appreciate them, and we'll try to answer them as soon as possible. Thank you.